So good afternoon, attendees and panelists. My name is Shamika. I serve as the Associate Director of the James Beard Foundation. The James Beard Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to celebrate, support, and elevate the people behind America's food, culture, and champion a standard of good food anchored in talent, equity, and sustainability. To learn more about our JBF programs and events and initiatives, please visit us at jamesbeard.org or at our new venue, Platform by jbf.org. I'm really excited about today's panel and our continued collaboration with the Queer Food Foundation. Today's webinar is going to be focused on hearing from queer, Asian American, and Pacific Islander food folks. So to get us started, I'd love to kick things off and introduce you to Vanessa Parrish, who serves as the Executive Director and co-founder of the Queer Food Foundation.
Thank you, Shamika. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Really excited for this conversation. Just wanted to introduce Queer Food Foundation. For those who do not know, we are a platform utilizing to support, elevate, and bring community together in queer food spaces. Please check out our resources. We have a queer food directory. We have a queer gift guide just coming out for the holiday season, and many other resources to support folks that are facing food insecurity, wanting to build regional connections in their area, and a lot more. I do want to introduce my chair of the board, Sunny Levin, who is our moderator. Sunny is a digital marketer, food journalist, and cook living in Baltimore. She has held positions across the food industry, ranging from nonprofit research to Fortune 500 innovation strategy. As an advocate for food justice, Sunny is also interested in the intersection of food, technology, and sustainability. Sunny has received a BA in history and science with honors from Harvard College, which I love. And so I'm going to leave it off to Sunny. We're excited for the conversation and enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you to our sponsors, Bento Box, as well as to the James Beard Foundation for the continued collaboration. I've been with the Queer Food Foundation for about 2 years now, and it has been just continued privilege to be able to facilitate conversations like these, where we get to talk about our identities in spaces that are really welcoming, that are really open, and that are really, really educational for members of our community. So appreciate the time from all of you and the energy to make this happen. And I'd love to introduce our panelists for today. We will be in conversation with Fred Chang, who was born in Taiwan and raised in Southern California. Fred is best known for his sweet tooth and has worked in kitchens all across the globe of James Beard Award nominated and winning chefs, including Christina Tosi, and Frank McClelland. Fred has learned dessert from some of the best pastry chefs across the globe and currently is creating food content, posting regularly on his recipe blog, Freddy's Harajuku, and his cooking and baking for private dinner and cake orders. We're also joined by Tara Monsod, who is currently in her first executive chef role at Anime in San Diego. Tara brings over a decade of incredible kitchen experience, a ton of passion and culinary perspective shaped by her upbringing as a Filipino American to Puffer Malarkey Collective. And she has also worked in some of San Diego's most prominent restaurants. Finally, we're joined by Jon Kung. Jon is the Detroit-based chef and very popular food content creator, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. What doesn't he do? And his debut cookbook, Kung Food, has released this fall from Clarkson Potter. Jon began exploring their version of Chinese American food through a really successful pop-up restaurant, Kung Food Market Studio. And after the pandemic, Jon started posting videos of the recipes on social media, documenting those processes of blending cultural traditions, ingredients, flavors in some really incredible new ways, and has been rewarded with an incredible online following of over 2 million people. So we've got a really, really incredible group today. Thank you so much for joining me here. Yeah, I'd love to just start kicking it off by actually starting with a question that isn't so much about queerness, but really about your individual cultural backgrounds and heritages. Can you tell me a little bit about a dish that you feel represents your cultural heritage and why it's important to you? Can we start with Fred, who is the top person on my screen?
Okay, for sure. I mean, I feel like the most iconic dish in Taiwanese culture is beef noodle soup, or nielo tang, which is basically beef shanks that are stewed with a bunch of spices and tomatoes and served with noodles. it's very homey, it's comforting. It takes influences from all the different spices that really come from both China, Japan, and various parts of Southeast Asia. So it's really what epitomizes Taiwanese cooking to me anyways, is in that it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different cultures coming together into one pot wonder.
Awesome. Chef Tara?
Hello, everyone. So on the menu currently at Anime is our short rib kare kare, which is very Filipino. It shows our culture, especially a dish that is celebrated, especially on the holidays, like Christmas and Thanksgiving. It is a elevated version of it, but it's one of the dishes at Anime that I cannot take off the menu. It's been on there since day one. It was one of the first dishes I would like to say that I was very unapologetic about, and really wanted to push Filipino food forward. So that is right now currently my #1 dish.
Awesome. I love that word, unapologetic. And I think as we kind of continue the conversation today, I think a lot of your backgrounds and a lot of your stories are spotlighted here today because of how proudly you display your identities and how proudly you display the identities of the communities you represent. So thank you. And Chef Jon, I'd love to hear about a dish that you feel represents your cultural heritage.
Thank you for choosing me last, because that was I was like racking my brain trying to figure out something that best suits me, or at least the best answer for this question. And I decided on Thanksgiving turkey congee. As a Chinese American person, coming over to the United States, like having that mix of Chinese home cooking in the form of jok, but then also having like using what is left over from like a Western celebration and using that to make kind of like something that is celebratory and at the same time very unique to us, but also has the element of like non-wastefulness and making sure you use every part of your meal. Just seems like, you know, it celebrates family, it celebrates togetherness, it celebrates culture, but it also shows that like Chinese pragmatism that we all know and love.
A lot of pragmatism, I think, in these households. And I feel like in terms of identity and how that's influenced as well, has your identity as a member of the LGBTQ community intersected with your identity as an Asian American, as a cook, as a chef? And if so, how? Like, what does that look like for you? Obviously, that's a big, kind of meaty, complicated question. But I'm curious, right? Just like that kanji is absolutely a representation of different cultures intersecting in a way that's coming together really beautifully. How have your identity showed up throughout the course of your culinary career, and then also, you know, outside of the kitchen? Whoever would like to start, please feel free to start.
I guess I'll go first. For me, being a person of color, Asian, woman, queer, it's a lot of boxes I get to check, you know, and for me, it's almost a privilege that I'm able to do all those boxes because it's a lot of representation. I say this all the time when I took over Anime. I thought I just looked at it as being a chef, taking over another, just, you know, a normal chef doing their job. But for me, when I started meeting guests and seeing the representation and how it mattered for people, I think it was other people telling me how important it was to them. So I think because of that and me being very almost vulnerable and open about who I am, it's allowed other people who look like me or who are queer like I am or whatever it is, a space to be able to work where they feel not like the other, I would guess you would say, or just feel comfortable where, you know, it's where I give them a place where growth like that can happen for them. Does it necessarily lead to who I am and every decision I make? Not necessarily, I'm a chef and foremost. And I think everything else is very much a plus. And it's with all of those boxes, I've seen a change in the dining room and diversity. And I think that alone and having a space for all those people to dine is the most rewarding out of having this position. And not only that, having a very diverse team where it all shapes and sizes are welcome. So.
Okay, that's going to be very hard for me to follow. But I would say, so I immigrated here when I was really young, and I lived in a predominantly non-Asian neighborhood. So in order to fit in, I did have to lose a lot of touch with my own culture. So for a long time, I was actively trying to run away from the fact that I was Asian and that I was gay until about 7 years ago, when I decided, you know what, just be who you are who you see in the mirror and embrace who you are. One thing that really resonated with me when I worked with Christina Tosi at Milk Bar was the culture there, which was doing you and being yourself and embracing that. So instead of just trying to deny that, you know, I'm an Asian immigrant and trying to deny the fact that I am attracted to men, why not embrace that and let that be who I am? So that way I can continue to not only love myself, but put that sort of love into the food that I put forward. So I'd say that learning to love who you are definitely can help impact not only the food that you make, but also I guess like the presence you have and the representation you have. Being able to be visible to other people and say, look, you might be a little bit different than what we might be used to seeing on like the TV, but we have voices and we have a presence and we have representation. So it's been really great that I was able to do that when I myself was on MasterChef seasons 10 and 12.
I think it takes courage to do anything that is outside of the norm, whether it be like you're a non-traditional career path, or even if it's expressing your culture in a way that might not be expected by the norm. And to do so, it does take courage. And for me, that courage was definitely queer. It came from a place of queer expression. And I learned to like be an expressive person as a queer person first. You know, I grew up in a pretty traditional Chinese family where, you know, we don't make waves. I'm the eldest of my generation. There was a lot of expectations placed on me as a result. And the ability for me to like decide for myself and to actually make statements based on those decisions at all came from being around my chosen family, and who just happened at time of like my very young development just be a lot of drag queens in Detroit. They taught me how to express myself as a creative person and as a queer person boldly, and that informs every bit of my art that I have now.
Wow, that's amazing. And something I've heard, I think, throughout listening to all three of you talk about this is, you know, what does it look like to have pressure with that representation? What does it mean to be an ambassador, and what kind of, you know, bravery does it take? I would love to hear all of you talk a little bit more about that. Is like, is there a moment that stands out to you as, wow, this is really hard, you know, representing people in this way, representing myself in this way is really difficult, but a moment that stands out to you is something that is a source of pride?
I guess I'll go first again. I think that was honestly one of the biggest adjustments when I took on this role. Again, I thought with taking over a kitchen, you're in the background, you know. But to be in the front, I was definitely an adjustment for me. It can be a lot of pressure representing maybe a group or a community, and maybe doing it, you know, right, but also I feel like there is no right or wrong way. I just think if you're honest to yourself, I think people will naturally resonate with that, which is versus trying to fit a mold. I think people want realness in the end. They want they gravitate to something that they can relate to. Therefore, whether it's being queer or Asian, or just a chef in this industry, for me, it's a lot of. I do get a lot of guests. Fred actually came in not that long ago for dinner, which is small world. But it's I get a lot of guests who come to me like, you know what you do is very important. It gives me hope that, that I can do something the same in the future, that it is possible. And then I think the biggest thing that is the most rewarding is that the representation within the food, where I'm sure we all agree within the Asian culture, food is very much a love language. And expressing it that way and seeing non-Asian folks get that feeling when you eat a certain cuisine or a certain dish is and then having them have almost like this ratatouille moment or emotion related to it, for me is like one of the most rewarding things, and which continue to motivate me to create, try to get that right bite for a guest where they say, you know what, that reminds me of my mom, or that reminds me of something. And then being Asian American and having that in between of being Asian and, and American, like culturally, food is probably the one thing that gets passed along the most and is probably the most triggering as far as emotion and nostalgia. So I think that is a great gift for me to be able to do that for people, whether it's Filipino, whatever it is, but it's very much an edible art that brings a lot of joy to people.
I would say for me, one of the, I guess, most enlightening moments, it was probably one of also the toughest moments in my life. It was when I first came out, again, 7 years ago. I was living with someone who I thought was a friend. Turns out he did not necessarily approve of my sexual orientation. So having to overcome living with someone who actively was trying to essentially shame me for being queer and being able to still thrive despite that sort of repression, it was very empowering for me because it made me realize I shouldn't let other people hold my perception. Like what I view of myself is really where my power should stem from. So that was definitely like where I had my sort of queer awakening of realizing just be yourself, just love yourself, and the right people will come into your life. If they can't agree or accept you for who you are, you don't really need them in your life. They're not going to help you in any way. And in terms of Asian representation, so back when a long time ago, this was like 5 years ago, I was on season 10 of MasterChef, and I was the only East Asian contestant on the show. There was a lot of pressure for me to represent and do well because people who are watching this would, like, all the East Asians would look and see, oh, he's the only one. Like, he's the one holding up the, like, basically, I felt like there was the entire weight of an entire continent on my shoulders for the duration of that season. And part of me was worried that I didn't do well enough, but just hearing everyone have such positive reception and kind words to say to me for how I did, it was very validating in me and realizing, it's not necessarily about how, like, winning the whole thing or not. It's just about being able to be represented and be visible for people out there to realize, okay, people like us, we can be considered normal now. We can be considered accepted.
So, on the topic of representation, I never really set out to be an example of anything. I've led a really colorful life, and I would say like 70% of it was probably spent doing things that other people should not emulate. So being told all of a sudden while I was on my book tour, that thank you for the representation. It's so great to see another queer Asian person in food doing this and doing all of that. Like, it's very gratifying to say. But it's also like it's humbling in a way, because it's like it's not really, I don't think anyone really sets out to be an example. Like, we're just literally living our lives and doing the best that we can. And if our stories happen to be things that inspire other people and things that make people like proud of themselves and proud of who they are, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, I owe everything that I have to these multiple facets of me that inform my food as well as my content. But ultimately, like, if people can just see me and feel like their own and have that trigger of self-love in them, then that's amazing. But I don't think it's something that I try to do. But I'm happy to do it at the same time.
Yeah, very fair. And Jon, congrats, not only on your cookbook launch and the tour, but also on your engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah, but in terms of the development process, because I think that was something that really struck me, hearing about and reading through your book. What was it like to really focus and hone in and say, I want every single part of this to be intentional. I want every single part of this to be, kind of a love story to third culture food and third culture cooking. And how is that, how have your identities shaped what that book became?
I was very fortunate to have been aware of the third culture identity since high school. I was hopping around between Toronto and then Hong Kong, where third culture was pretty much like just something that was, we were told, like, this is who you are. And so that, living in that way and living with that understanding was totally a privilege of mine. And it wasn't until I started just talking about it casually on TikTok that I was getting responses by very young people who responded with such excitement along the lines of like, oh my God, this is like who I am. I didn't know there was a term for this. And so I felt that it was really important that of all the different ways that I express myself through food, that identity, especially the third culture identity, is something that I really need to focus on. And through my more in-depth research in it, and through, like, I guess, getting real personally philosophical with the idea of what third culture cuisine in America is, I did come to the conclusion that this is the future of American cuisine. And this is the most exciting thing about the cuisine of this country. It's because of our proximity to each other. It's because of our experiences as third culture people, and not just third culture Asian people, because we share this experience and these understandings and these feelings with immigrants from all over the world. We have that in common with each other. We have that creative spark in common with each other. And I think because of that, this is the future of what, like, the food of this country could be.
Yeah, and I'm personally a little bit of a history buff, so I'd love to hear, is there one dish from your cookbook or one recipe that you feel like has just an unbelievable amount of like history behind it, or something that has a really shocking story?
Yes. So this one is not any of this. This particular recipe is not one of mine, but it is a cultural dish of Hong Kong. But Hong Kong borscht is a dish that it has so much history behind it, because it did start as actual Ukrainian borscht and had moved through Russia, down through China, through via Shanghai, and then finally ended up in Hong Kong. And what started as like beets and cream turned into tomatoes and oxtail, but it was still cooked by the same people that had to move for like during like various stages of political unrest over like two countries. And now it's something that you see in like every tang, every cafe that you see. It's either Hong Kong borscht or the cream corn soup. Yeah, that one is the story of that particular dish. I find to be so fascinating, and truly embodies what this cuisine is, and shows that it's not a new thing at all.
Yeah, that's been something that I think has been very, very interesting over the course of honestly just the last couple of years is cuisines rising to prevalence in sort of the mainstream culinary zeitgeist that have been around for a really long time, and pathways and traditions. And actually, I think that's a great time to transition over to chatting with Tara, because as a Filipino American myself, I think Filipino food has in many ways been inserted into the spotlight recently in a way that is probably newer from a food media perspective. But we're cooking the same way we've been cooking for generations and generations and generations in many ways. And for you, when you took over as Anime's exec chef in 2021, you took over from a team that looked very different, that cooked very differently, from a restaurant that has really changed in terms of identity. And I would love to hear a little bit about your POV of how Filipino food has kind of, what does it feel like for Filipino food to be spotlit when we've always been here? A, and B, how under your leadership has the restaurant evolved, both from a sort of flavor and menu standpoint, but also culturally under your leadership?
Okay. You just went for it, girl. No, just kidding. No. For as far as the food and being Filipino, I think it's just our time. I think we just like what you said, we've been around. We've played a special part in American history. Culturally, we've been here a while. There's so much history in California alone, as far as how our community has been here. But I think right now, I've been in the industry for, I think 13 years now. And it's always been a goal for me to put kind of Filipino food out there in a way that isn't a point place where it's buffet style, steam tables. Although there is nothing wrong with that. That food is delicious. It's there. But I just, it always kind of made me wonder why in most cultures, like even Chinese, Japanese, it's presented in a way where it's fine dining or other than maybe a to-go box, and I think right now, especially after COVID, I feel like there's a generation of first generations who've been here, who aren't, used to be a nursing student, but I think again, it's about being unapologetic. I think they want to be unapologetic about who we are as Filipino Americans. I think we're almost taught to almost assimilate so that we don't be looked down upon, I guess you would say, as our parents come from a different generation of almost survival, and where they come to this country to be able to provide better for people like us, and I think with that alone creates a lot of pressure. And so to do the jobs that are expected. But I think me being one of those people, being a chef in a creative field, I think it's shown that, it is possible to do other career choices. And I think other people are on that same wave, like props to Kasama, who got their Michelin first Filipino restaurant. And, I think in each major city, there's a lot of Filipinos like myself who are putting Filipino food out there in a way that is still very Filipino, but change it enough where it is a representation of themselves, and that's all I'm trying to do. We go through all these techniques and everything to kind of fuse things together. And I love hearing guests say, it's nice to sit and have our food in a dining room like this with a glass of wine and really good service and all of the above. Like, how come this hasn't happened before? I'm like, good question, but it's happening. It's happening right now. And I think if we're relentless about it, what's really good about our community is like, it's not a lot of fight against each other. It's a lot of support and all across the board of like, they're like, Kasama's doing well, like, hell yeah, like go, keep going, keep representing, and as far as related to my kitchen, half my team is Filipino, which is, is not something that I saw a lot growing up in the industry. I usually was mostly men. And then not too many Asians, just like what Fred said, maybe one or two out of the whole restaurant. And then on top of that, maybe, you know, maybe the only queer female for a smaller team, you know. But with that being said, I think the diversity and everything has changed a lot. And I think the next generation is seeing people like us do it, so they're doing it too. I hate to say that I'm getting older, but I am getting older, you know, and it's those, I'm having a lot of young, hardworking individuals work for me who, you know, my team is more than half Filipino. My chef team is all Filipina. And first of all women team, all Filipina team, that's like very rare in itself, you know what I mean? Um, and I think I'm very proud of that. I think even more than the food, I think I'm proud of the people that we have because, again, it's a restaurant. I can't do it by myself, but I think because of that and that heart that's in the food from them, I think it really makes a big difference when they are working and doing their job. It changes a lot of things. So I forgot where I'm going with this, but as far as the representation for our food, that's probably like hand in hand, like the most rewarding thing out of all of that. I think, did I answer your question? I think it did.
Yeah, and absolutely. And in terms of the culture that you've built at your restaurant with your team, in terms of just core values and how that shows up in the food, from day one, like when somebody walks in the kitchen, what are you expecting of them, and then what are you giving them in return, in terms of values?
Honestly, personality and your core values as a person is probably something I could care less how much you know about cooking, honestly. I think attitude is probably the number one thing, and how you value teamwork. I think a lot of our culture, as being Filipino, is a lot of how I run things. It's a lot of family. It's a lot of taking care of each other. It's a lot of working together, a lot of respect, a lot of hiya. If those don't know what hiya is, it's like knowing where you come from. For me, it keeps me humble in that way. And I think and knowing where I come from, not only culturally, but how I grew in this industry, coming from a very line cook, you know, to where I am now. I think not forgetting that has kept me a level head so that, you know, I work right next to my team as much as I can. I do get pulled a bunch of different ways, but, you know, they know that deep down when it comes down to it, I'll roll my sleeves up and get dirty just like the rest of them. So I think I've said this before, as far as leadership wise, when you have a leader that you know that has your back and will go to the trenches for you also if need be, I think it builds a different kind of culture. And you know, it's very cool to see non-Filipinos say Filipino words that are on the menu. You know, and that, I think that's, and they're all about it. They want it. They like that, you know, they're part of something special, where Filipino representation in food is not the most common, but they're part of it. And they get it because I'm very vulnerable about it, and I'm very let them know that you are part of something special here, and I'm grateful. And with that alone, I think teamwork is just so much easier. And usually, if that's not if you're not about that life, usually you naturally just kind of weed yourself out, you know. And that's one thing that I value, and that's one thing that works for me. And I think the people that are part of my team want the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's amazing. I think teamwork and the evolution of teamwork in kitchens that look and feel very, very different, and in culinary environments more broadly that look and feel very different, has been just incredible to watch as the industry has evolved. And actually, Fred, that leads me to a question for you. You have been all over the screen a couple times on MasterChef. You have been a leader on the show, in the kitchen, and then also through the content that you've been creating. I want to talk specifically about your donut recipe ebook, the one that you put out in 2020. I thought that was amazing. I thought the Yakult glazed donut, the cake donut, was super fresh and super creative. But what really impressed me at that time was, lots of folks were putting out ebooks right during the pandemic, but you use that opportunity to really integrate and give back to the BLM Global Network and the It Gets Better project. Can you tell me what that was like to sort of say, okay, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna launch this, and I want everybody to be able to share in my recipes, but also share in the work that these community organizations are doing. A, tell me a little bit more about the book, and then B, can you tell me about like what that process was like of integrating with these community organizations?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the ebook itself was called Out of the Fryer. It was several different donut-themed donut recipes that I wanted to come up with, just because it really incorporated a lot of my pastry background, as well as little touches here and there of my cultural background, with things like you mentioned with the Yakult donut, as well as the hojicha donut, or hojicha beignets with milk tea, which that one was actually my favorite recipe, the hojicha one. In terms of what drove me to do that, it was back in 2020. Times were very uncertain. Times were very scary. A lot of, marginalized parties were like, the things that they were going through was coming to light to me. And it was starting to make me realize, because I've lived in a very sort of sheltered little bubble my whole life, but seeing that, there are people out there who genuinely need help, who genuinely need that visibility. I've experienced it from the homophobia scale, but I didn't really understand until BLM became a thing that it was affecting people on a racial scale to that degree. And it made me realize that something needs to change and something needs to be done differently. And at the time, I was growing quite a decent platform through being on MasterChef. And it was during the pandemic, people had nothing else to do anyways. So I figured, why not put some time into making an ebook and donating all the proceeds I can sell off of this ebook to 2 different communities, one being for BML or BLM, and the other being for It Gets Better, which is a nonprofit that's supposed to help with teenagers or youth with their coming out process, just so that way, when they come out, it's not going to be as scary or as traumatic or as terrifying as it could be, which I personally understand what that feels like. And, food's meant to be about love and spreading awareness and understanding. So I figured, why not use my food to do the same by raising money for it on both ends and just making the world a happier and safer place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I've got one more big question and one small question before we hop into our Q&A sent in by some of our attendees today. But I think one theme and one topic that I've heard all of you touch on in your own ways today has been family. And I know for me as an Asian American, my relationship with and love for food and cooking is absolutely influenced by my family. My mom's actually on the call today. Hi, Mom. But I would love to hear about, how your relationship with your family, whether your chosen family, your biological family, whoever you consider family, right? How has that been influenced by, and how has that influenced your identities as a cook, as a chef? How has your food been influenced by and influenced your family?
How has cooking or food influenced my family? I mean, it's very much a representation of them. I am a product of them, and I have a few family members that are in here right now, one of them being my cousin Lisa, who is almost like a big sister to me, who'll help navigate me, not only through cooking, but life and being, navigating what it is to be queer in this community, and helping me have confidence in doing that and kind of rising and having my head up and not, being ashamed, I guess you would say. But the reason I cook is for people like them. It's to, not only represent them, but it's, there's so many memories that are related to sitting at a table with people and sharing conversations and all of the above. And for my parents, for in particular, I think for me, I always tell my staff that dining at the level like anime, we aren't like a 3 Michelin star restaurant, but it does have a price tag on it. And most people, can't dine like that. And I really tell my team that dining like this is a privilege, and for people to choose us for their special event and being, Filipino or just, whatever it is, seeing my family or my parents being able to sit in the dining room where they're represented in that way, I think, and especially my parents who didn't, I wasn't raised to dine like this, but for me to be able to provide that for them, I think is very rewarding. There is a sense of, when they sit down, they're like, oh, that's too much food, or, that's, like there's a lot of that, not shamefulness, but being shy, in the sense. And I'm like, you know what? I'm your daughter. You could have whatever you want, and I think being able to say that is wonderful. It shows they taught me having a good work ethic and, just pushing through even when you're tired is, especially in this industry, I think is very important. And they taught me that work ethic. And I think that is very much representative of them. So I think all of this that I'm doing is very much a product of how I was raised. And I think they see that, and I think they get a sense of like relief when they see that their daughter is doing okay. I'm getting a little emotional talking about it because you see your parents work so hard, so to do that for them, I think is very rewarding.
I can say, so I have a very close relationship with my parents and my sister, even to this day, fortunately. In terms of where my cooking is influenced by them, it's less so on a cultural level, I'll be honest. My mother grew up, so she had a lot of health complications. So we ate very, very healthy growing up. So you can imagine to her disdain when it turned out that I fell in love with pastry and baking, all of the things that she absolutely was not happy about. And she can blame my sister for this, because my first exposure to French pastry was actually because my sister did a study abroad in France, and she stayed at a chocolatier's house. And she was telling me about all these amazing French desserts I've never heard of, because of course my mom was like, sugar, butter, cream, avert your eyes. So learning what a macaron was, a financier, the difference between ice cream and gelato, all these things from my older sister, it was what made me realize desserts are pretty cool. It's better than just eating fruit at the end of my meal, which is what my mom would put us up to. In terms of how my mom's influence on all this came in, though, after a while, well, first off, she forced me to bake vegan for the first 5 years of me learning how to bake, as her way of saying it's healthier. So I actually got my start in baking as a vegan baker instead of a normal baker. I learned how to make vegan cupcakes before souffle, which was kind of funny. But from there on out, my mom kind of became my biggest supporter when I started to unlock what the Chinese term for this is fu tai tian, or not too sweet. And I started to get my desserts to fall under that category of being very balanced, where the sugar doesn't overtake the other flavors, where when you get an orange dessert, you actually taste the citrus. You don't just taste straight up confectioner sugar in your mouth or something like that. So my mom definitely helped me understand the concept of balancing different flavors with the sugar, to not let the sugar overpower other ingredients. She started to get a lot more on board with me exploring pastry as a career and as an option. She was also my biggest cheerleader when it came to when I learned how to do plated desserts. She is a professional calligrapher, so she has like that eye for Zen aesthetic. And the funniest part about it was whenever I present her a plated dessert, when I'd be learning or practicing different things, she would not hold back. As a Taiwanese immigrant, we can be a very savage bunch and a very blunt bunch. So if something looked ugly, she would tell me it looked ugly, but then she'd tell me how to change it so that way it looked nicer. So I owe to my mother the ability to learn how to balance flavors and how to plate things beautifully. And I owe to my older sister my initial exposure to French cuisine.
For me, my actual family provided me with the background and the cultural foundation of which, I would do the deep dive into the researching and learning how to cook Chinese food. But it would have been my chosen family in the form of my partner that provided me with like the support in which to keep going. one example that I could think about is the fact that I say partner, he's not my fiance, but fiance is such a big word. There's so much word in fiance. But he had a full-time job as a mortgage broker at a bank, and we would have service at my studio on weekends. And after work, he would also work on the weekends. He'd come home from like doing an 8-9 hour day, and without like batting an eye, would change into some dishy scrubs and a heavy apron, and then proceed to do the hand wash all the dishes for the entire length of service, as well as washing all the pots and pans without ever complaining. I definitely, as the chef of that operation, did a lot more whining than he ever did. And this was like 12-course tasting menu for 16 people at a time. And that is a lot of silverware, that is a lot of stemware. And he did that all by hand. And he did this for years until I got him finally a Hobart dishwasher. So yeah, in that way, he has been completely supportive of me in all my endeavors and has been with me through like every iteration of this journey. And so yeah, I think the family, one of the responsibilities of the family to a person is support, and that definitely solidified him as that definition for me.
That's amazing. So you said, 2 gifts. Here's a dishwasher and here's a ring.
Yeah.
Amazing. And actually, Fred, something that you mentioned about the way that your mom has influenced your cooking was really interesting to me, the concept of like not too sweet. I'm sure that's a compliment that all 3 of you are incredibly, incredibly happy to receive when somebody says that to you. What is another compliment or another statement somebody has made after tasting your food that has really stuck with you, besides obviously the holy grail of perfect sugar balance?
I'm trying to think of like a specific one where someone said something. I mean, one critique or response I got that made me actually hilariously went viral years and years later was when I made my audition dish for my first season of MasterChef with Gordon Ramsay. He picked up the plate and he licked it clean on national television. And I remember when that happened, I was like, oh my God, I could die happy now. Like, you can eliminate me tomorrow. I don't care. Like, I have this moment, so that's all I need. So I'd say that was probably like the highest compliment I've ever received on anything. Also, they did say that dessert was not too sweet too. So there was that, but getting that on top of that was like, I don't think I could ever get a higher compliment than that in my life.
I think for me, it's I think what's better than any maybe critic is when the aunties and uncles kind of give you the thumbs up. There's I think there's a lot of fight with our food. That's something that getting out of their head that it's supposed to be cheap or whatever it is, or you don't do it that way, you do it this way, or this and that. And everybody has their opinions, which is totally fine, but to have an auntie and uncle or even my parents, sit there and be like, good, that's the nod of approval, which they, they really don't have to say much. And doing that alone and paying, instead of paying the amount that they pay for a short rib kare is, when, in a sense, you could feed a whole family with the same amount, I think that is one of the biggest compliments that I kind of like, I sometimes I walk the dining room and I see, people our age who bring their parents or their grandparents, and they usually don't come on their own. It usually takes people like us to bring them in. And once they bring them in, it's because they're skeptical when they sit down. You look around, you're like, this is not the norm, So they're already coming in with an expectation that they might be disappointed because it has happened before for them. And so when sometimes I see a table and I know that table's going out, I'll follow the dish out and I'll stand there in the corner and just watch them take that first bite. And that first bite is the most honest. You cannot hide, and nobody's watching you or anything like that. You don't know you're being watched. And if they go, that giving you that nod of approval or like looking at them like, oh, this is good. this is actually pretty good. You know, it's like that to me is so rewarding. That means I hit home. I hit home here, I hit home here, and then they're leaving with a sense of being proud of what is being presented to them on a plate. That is very much a representation of them, a community of, you know, whatever it means to them as a especially with the Filipino as a Filipino. So.
What Tara said was so real. I based my entire career just chasing that, like watching people react to my food. And the first time I was doing like casual pop-ups, and the first time you see the person like try your food and they look up and they almost look mad. They've got like the angry eyes, and then they just like mouth like, that's so good. Like, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life, because I just want to do that. And thank God every other professional kitchen I ever worked at was a closed kitchen and not an open format, because I probably would have been such a creep. Just like I could see myself just like looking over the past and just watching people, seeing like what their reactions to the food I make was, because I am just that type of person. I stare. But yeah, I think one of the more recent compliments that I ever got, and I was being kind of jokey and catty in response, was like somebody said they had cooked one of the recipes, one of the soup recipes in the book, and they were like, this is just like how my grandma used to make it, or it tastes just like my grandmother's. And my response was, well, was your grandmother any good? And they said, well, look, she was a chef. And I was like, oh, well, in that case, thank you very much. That feels amazing.
That's amazing. I think everybody's grandmother is the best cook in the world. All at the same time. Everybody's grandmother, the best cook in the world. I know mine is. But we have a couple of questions from some of our audience members today. And I'd love to spend the last 5 minutes or so working through some of those. Thank you for indulging mine today. But I would love to know, somebody has asked, do you feel like, or how do you feel like a participant in the way things are changing or shifting in the food scene representing your culture?
For me, I'm very proud. I'm very proud of where we have come so far. I'm excited to see where we're going. I think for me, for Filipino Americans especially, I think it's an exciting time. I think it really is. I think for me, I accepted this position after COVID, or maybe during COVID. And you know, Asian hate was very much very active at the time, and to come from that to, at least from that point for me as far as the restaurant to now, I think it's a lot of fun, you know. Almost first and foremost, to be part of a community where you're connected not only by culture but by food, two amazing things to be connected to. It's like you know, it's a lot of fun, you know. And I'm just really excited to see what the future generation is going to do. You know, again, like you said, there isn't much Filipino food on the map, but it's coming. And I think we're only barely getting started. And I think people like the cooks that I have in my kitchen, or I like to call them chefs, in my kitchen, are going to be part of that wave. And to know that you know, I say this all the time, my success is contingent upon theirs. So if they are doing well and representing themselves in whatever they want to do, whether it's in Asian food or not, I think it's gonna make waves, and it's just gonna continue, you know, and change is going to happen. And who knows, you know, they might accomplish things that we might not even have imagined. So I think that's the most exciting part for me, is just to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, building off of what Tara was saying, I mean, I personally don't necessarily know if I am participating in the movement as much as I am just living it, but it's crazy to think how far we've come as a culture, just because growing up, and this is a really weird story, but like, we used to make boba at home just because there wasn't any boba stores in my neighborhood as a kid. And I still remember when we fed boba, which we'd call frog eggs, to my white neighbor. She freaked out, thought she was actually being fed frog eggs, her mom tried to send her to the ER. But it's just crazy to think that it went from people freaking out and thinking it's this foreign concept to, you know, every single person city has a boba store, probably somewhere like 10 minutes driving. So seeing something that was so specific to my culture and my like household now being mainline, like being made mainstream is really cool. And even like Din Tai Fung, which is very Taiwanese, which I'm very proud of because it's Taiwanese. We even have one in my hometown, like walking distance from me, like now when we didn't back then. So it's really cool to see aspects of your own culture being now represented when back then they were very foreign or very weird or just being seen as different. So I guess like what I've learned over the last 20 years is that different is cool and different is being accepted. And it's really, really enlightening to see.
That's awesome. Fred, I grew up driving an hour and 30 minutes round trip with my younger brother for boba. So it's nice that things are a little more convenient now. I agree.
An hour?
Got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, no, 1,000% agree. I would totally if that was the only option.
Being a part of a movement, I guess I would echo Tara's statement that it has been a lot of fun. I would highly recommend anyone else to do it. I spent most of my professional culinary career cooking in isolation. The pop-ups that I would do and even operating my studio here in Detroit, like I did all of that in a very clandestine, less than legal manner. Very authentic Hong Kong if you think about it. But then like after going on TikTok, after writing this book, and after getting the access that I had to cook with and speak with and just create with other people doing the same thing as I have, has been extremely affirming, but also creatively fulfilling. Because again, none of us are out here setting out to be role models. We're all just living our lives and trying to make things that excite us. And if that results in a wave of people realizing and like truly seeing us and the things that we do, then that's great. I think it's really important to understand that like everyone here is riding on the crest of a wave that has been moving for years. We have been doing work for so long, and like being able to sit here now as a result of all that work is one of the things that is affirming. But also, I guess the movement has been years in the making, and to see it bearing fruit now is just extremely satisfying.
Yeah, it's been a journey, and I think we are all getting started. We are also right at time, so I will hand it back to Shamika and Vanessa to close us out. But as a quick thank you, I appreciate the time and the energy and the stories that all of you have given us today. Thank you for sharing yourselves with us. Thank you for advertently or inadvertently continuing to provide the forces of change in this industry and the representation that we deserve.
I'll
Thank you
hand
guys
it over to Vanessa to close out. Sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
No worries. Thank you folks so much for joining and attending. I really love the conversation. I was also getting emotional when Tara was talking. And so I was, it was a really great moment. But please check us out. This is our last one of 2023. We'll be doing some more conversations like these, bringing in some more amazing folks for 2024. So please look out for those and support our JBF panel collaboration. And of course, thank you to Bento Box for sponsoring. And we hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you for attending and happy holidays.